Hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Oh,
Let me keep this
just
fan
another
off.
day. Oh, there you go. I'm in my closet in the Senate, in the Senate
Oh
press
my
gallery. So my small little closet. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me and really kind of speak with our viewers out in the Virgin Islands. It's a big week for them. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right in if that's okay with you.
Yes,
Um,
perfect. Thank you for everything. We appreciate it.
oh, of course. Thank you. Okay, so really, I think the biggest question is why should Virgin Islanders support you, and how would you ensure that their voices are being heard?
I think we have to look at the state of our country, right? We have 70% of Americans that don't want a Trump Biden rematch. The majority of Americans disapprove of Trump. The majority of Americans disapprove of Biden. You look at both of those men put us trillions of dollars in debt that our kids are never going to forgive them for. And then you look at the fact that we've got a country in disarray and a world on fire, and we're going to fall back on two candidates in their 80s, knowing that we need someone that can put in 8 years solid, disciplined, and get us back on track. I think, the biggest focus there is, I think, looking at that scenario. But then you go and you look at what's happened through this race. We had 14 people in this race. We've defeated a dozen of the fellas. I got one more fella I've got to catch up to. But look at what happened. I mean, we started at 2%, we ended with 20% in Iowa. Then we got 43% in New Hampshire. But what's more important is Donald Trump, the Republican incumbent, technically, didn't get 43% of the vote. And so instead, he had a temper tantrum on stage talking about revenge. Then we hear him after a court case and he's talking about being a victim. And then he's saying anybody that supports me won't be part of his MAGA. You're running for president. This is a story of addition. This is about representing everybody and pulling people into our fold. We've got to go and get our country back on track. And I voted for Donald Trump twice. I was proud to serve America in his administration. But chaos follows him. And we've got to start really focusing on what we're going to do about the debt and get it back on track. How we're going to get our kids reading again and go back to the basics in education. How we're going to secure our borders once and for all. How we're going to bring law and order back to our cities and what we're going to do about these wars. We need to be preventing wars, not starting wars. And we've got to be able to deal with our adversaries, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's Iran. We've got to start taking that head on. And so I feel like America is so distracted, and we know that when America's distracted, the world is less safe, and we're seeing that play out all around us.
Yeah, perfect. And you have the Virgin Islanders. Sometimes people forget that they are Americans. They are a U.S. territory. Again, how can you ensure that their voices are going to be heard in a Haley administration?
Equal voices. I mean, the goal is to represent everybody and to serve everybody. And it's making sure that everyone feels like they are equal in every aspect when it comes to our government. I think that's hugely important that they feel that, whether it's, how we're combating China, whether it's their infrastructure, whether it's any of the other services that government provides, whether it's freedom and making sure that they have as much economic freedom as they possibly can. I think that's the biggest part, is just knowing that we serve them too, and that their voice matters just as much as anyone else's.
Awesome. Thank you. And really, you just kind of mentioned it, the economy. That's something that not only islanders think about, I think a lot of Americans think about. It's something that they worry probably a little too much about. How are you going to help ensure that the economy benefits not only the islanders, but people in Pennsylvania, New York, Michigan, places like that? And yeah, let's start there.
Well, first of all, I think we need an accountant in the White House to get this back on track. You look at the fact that we're $34 trillion in debt. We're having to borrow money just to make our interest payments. China owns some of that debt. And as much as I would love to say that Biden did that to us, the truth is our Republicans did that to us too. When they passed that $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill that expanded welfare, they left us with 80 million Americans on Medicaid, 42 million Americans on food stamps. That's a third of our country. And instead of trying to make it right, they doubled down, and Republicans opened up earmarks and pet projects for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them last December. Things like $30 million on an honors college in Vermont, 10 million to tear down a hotel in Alaska, 7.5 million on a courthouse in Colorado, all while 1 in 6 American families can't afford their utility bill. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So, what I think we need to do to get our economy back on track is, first of all, claw back the $100 billion of unspent COVID dollars that are still out there. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents going after middle America, go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud. One out of every $7 was spent fraudulently. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing, cut up the credit cards. Everybody has to balance their budget. I had to balance my budget as governor. Why is Congress the only group that refuses to balance a budget? We'll stop the spending, we'll stop the borrowing, we'll eliminate the pet projects and earmarks, and I'll veto any spending bill that doesn't take us back to pre COVID levels. The next thing we'll do is we'll take as many federal programs as we can and we'll send them down to the states and the territories. That way, you're reducing the size of the federal government, but you're empowering people on the ground. Think healthcare, think welfare, think education, think mental health. If we cut those strings and sent those resources down, they could better customize them in the areas in which they live. And then we want to start giving breathing room to the middle class. We're watching the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So we want to eliminate the federal gas and diesel tax in this country. We want to cut taxes on the middle class and simplify those brackets. And we want to make small business tax cuts permanent. They made them temporary. We need to make them permanent. Small businesses are the heartbeat of our economy. We need to start acting like it. When we start to do those things, on top of becoming energy dominant, in a way that we really grow our energy sector so that it doesn't just satisfy America, but it becomes an economic powerhouse. That will bring down inflation. That will pay down that debt. That will start to get us back on track in terms of how we spend, what we spend, and focusing on getting things back into the freedom of the taxpayers and economic freedom as opposed to government being too big and too bloated.
Mm, perfect. I really just have just a couple more because I know you're a busy person. So, one thing is climate change. We've heard some scientists testify in Congress and have said that climate change impacts places like the territories. For example, unfortunately hurricanes are getting stronger, and then also it places. Impacts places like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This year, they're experiencing not as much snow as they were hoping to get, or that they usually get, impacting tourism. What can you do to offset the impacts of climate change?
Well, first of all, I believe climate change is real. And I can relate, but I live in South Carolina. We are prone to our hurricanes. We're prone to flooding. We see, the impacts that that has on us. And what we need to do is first, as we look at the environment, it shouldn't be partisan. We all want clean air. We all want clean water. We all want an earth that we can leave to our kids and our grandkids that's healthy. And so, in order to do that, we've got to start partnering with our producers instead of demonizing our producers. First, call out the bad actors. India and China are our biggest polluters. We need to get together with the rest of the world and start holding those two countries accountable. Otherwise, they are not changing no matter how much activity we change, if they're not changing, it's not going to make a difference. The second thing is start looking at how we can transition in a common sense way. What we know now is we want our energy sector to be a powerhouse, but let's use our energy producers to help us with the innovations. Right now, we're looking at nuclear fusion. We're seeing ways that we can reduce the emissions, but do it in a way that we're partnering with them to create more innovations. You can't go and just say everybody's got to drive an electric car by 2033. That's not practical. One, because you're forcing Americans to buy something they may not want to buy. Two, it's an expensive car. Three, 70% of the batteries in electric cars are made in China. So you're giving a windfall to our enemies. But more than that, we don't have the infrastructure for that. And I'm not talking about charging stations. Electric vehicles are heavy. Our roads and bridges couldn't handle it if everybody drove an electric car by 2033. So instead of going from one extreme to the other, look at transitions in ways that are practical, that we can actually make a difference. Do it in a way that's not demonizing anybody, but unifying everybody in the fact that we can do this in a way that doesn't have to mandate and harm businesses or people, but it actually brings people together to say, how else can we make things better?
Okay, awesome. I'll just have this last question for you because again, I know that how busy and limited time you have. Again, Thursday's election down in the on the islands is it's getting a lot of talk. I want you to give your final pitch to voters down there. Are you excited for this election? I know it's not a typical, big one like like the states, but how are you feeling going into this election down in the Virgin Islands?
This is an important election. I mean, I am watching the Virgin Islands as much as I'm watching any other place because at the end of the day, you want to gain as much support from every American, right? Because you're going to be serving everybody. And what this comes down to is, do we want more of the same or do we want to go in a new direction? More of the same is not just Joe Biden, more of the same is also Donald Trump. Do we want to go back to these same two people who are so focused on themselves that they forget to talk about the American people and the needs that they have? Do we want to go back to two more candidates that continue to have us in chaos? Or do we want someone who's not going to have all the drama and the chaos, but go with a steady hand, with discipline, and with a work ethic that makes people proud? Do we want to go back to two men in their 80s when we really have to focus on 8 years of making sure that we're disciplined? And let's go back to where accountability becomes a part of government again. The accountability where every person, regardless of party, who serves in an elected position, they owe it to the people to earn their worth. And what I will tell you is I'm an accountant, I'm a mom, I'm a daughter of legal immigrants, I'm a military spouse. And at the end of the day, I'm doing this because I don't want my kids to live like this. We can do better. I don't want anybody else's kids to live like this. Just imagine if we became a country where we didn't have the anger, where we didn't have the division, where we didn't have the chaos, but we actually got things done. And we got it done for the sake of making our country better. That's the goal. I just want to make America normal again. We want it working, we want it serving, and we want it to be normal. And if, everyone there will join with me in this movement, I promise you, I will spend every single day proving to you that you made the right decision.
Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and pause this.